Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming. I'd like to thank Andrew for inviting me to give this talk to an audience of curious and liberty-loving people. Did you know that 50 years back there were fewer American libertarians than there are now in this very room, if I'm correct? So I think we made progress. Or maybe you're all a bunch of commies, I don't know. But, and I need to fear for my life, I don't know. But what I will address in this talk is rather controversial because there are very few people in this world that criticize democracy as strongly as I do. My ideas on that are not very original, though. I'm very much indebted to the book Beyond Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe. But I think it is important to realize or to get acquainted with these ideas. I've been active in the liberty movement for about 15 years. And I founded the Mises Institute in the Netherlands and the More Freedom Foundation. And since 2009, I've been busy with the issue of democracy and why it fails. And I've written co-authored a book on it, Beyond Democracy, which is now out in 20 languages. And it explains why democracy is both immoral and impractical. And in this talk, I will explain what the problems are that the Western democracies currently suffer from. And in the second part, I will explain why this correlates very strongly, or this can be explained by the principles and the dynamics of democracy. And in the third part of my talk, that will last about 30 minutes, I will explain an alternative based on individual liberty. How can we do better? Let's have a show of hands. Who of you is discontented with the current political situation in the UK? Yeah. And would that be the same as for your mobile phone, for instance, in general? Would you say, oh, my mobile phone is horrible, just as horrible as the political system? Well, generally, I think that is not the case. At least it's not for me. Because for me, you know, your political system, you vote for it, but you can't choose it. And with your mobile phone, you can. So most people are quite content, I think, with their mobile phones. So 20 years back, I remember I was very strongly in favor of democracy. But there was only one problem. I didn't know much about it. And just like most people. And just like most people, I was frustrated with the democratic results. And I also remember during that time that I met someone who was opposed to democracy. I didn't ask him why, but I remember I was being shocked. I thought it was an elitist or maybe in favor of an authoritarian system. And, well, how funny that I'm now even more opposed to it than he was. But by studying democracy, it gave me some benefits because it cured my frustration with politics. And I hope this will, if you're frustrated too, and obviously some of you are, that it will have similar beneficial effects on you. Most people, like I said, believe very strongly in democracy, whether they are socialists, conservatives, liberals. And it's like a secular religion that stands above any fundamental criticism. Just like you probably, I just believe what the politicians, the media, the educational system told us, that we thank our freedom and our prosperity to democracy. And another system is just not reasonably possible. It's, and when I talk to people who are disillusioned with the current democratic system, they say, well, this is not a true democracy. And it reminds me of the no true Scotsman's fallacy that you may be familiar with. So, but the cracks are now beginning to show. This was the cover article of the Economist magazine 3 years back. What's gone wrong with democracy? Of course, they have different solutions to the problem, but it's amazing that the crisis has been going on for 8 years now in Western democracies. Unemployment is very high, around 10%, sometimes even youth unemployment 25%. We have enormous public debts, which I go into later on. There's certainly social tension, as we can see in Germany, but also in the UK. So the cracks are beginning to show. And let me go into the problems in more detail that our democracies suffer from. And one of them is the increasing taxes as a percentage of GDP. In 1914, it was 12% of GDP. Now it's a whopping 52%. And still growing. You could say that we tax ourselves into slavery, as is seen by this, shown by this cartoon. Another problem is that there's enormous growth of the regulatory burden. This is the United States situation. In 1913, the regulation just comprised one book. Now it's 200 books, which means that 99.5% of all laws and regulations didn't exist 100 years back. And probably there are quite some entrepreneurs among the audience, and you bear the brunt mostly of all this regulation that you have to pass on with higher prices to your customers. And the customers blame you, of course. But the state is to blame. And the funny, well, it's not funny, but it's actually bad. But if regulation would have stopped growing in 1949, it has been researched, then our GDP would be 2.5 times as big, which means we could have, worked for 2 days a week instead of 5. This is another interesting graph. I don't know, but the democratic welfare state has grown enormously. Up till 30% of GDP is now spent on welfare. And this is the UK situation, but this is quite similar in the other Western democracies, in the United States too. More and more people are dependent on the state, and this causes a moral relativism, because it used to be that you have to work hard and be responsible to get money. Now you get money by doing the opposite. And of course, more and more people who are dependent on the state will vote for the state, will vote for more redistribution. If you notice that, and probably most of you do, that your purchasing power is continuously declining, then don't rely on the democratic state to counter it, because they like to print money and they cannot protect us from inflation. This is the United States situation, the dollar, which has decreased in value 98% in 100 years since the founding of the Fed. And well, this is, like I said, similar in most Western democracies. And I think this is a very telling graph too, because we think that the current recession is just a temporary phenomenon. But if you look during the long-term trend of the last 50 years, you will notice that economic growth has declined per year in the Western, on average, in the Western democracies, from 6.5% to 1.4% in the 2000s. And now it's even less. In the Eurozone, the last 10 years did not show any economic growth whatsoever. And this is despite things like nanotechnology, cloud computing, the internet, GPS, mobile phones, etc. So there's something really pushing the brakes now. Let's see. Yes, so what caused these problems? Well, did we vote for the wrong party? Did we have the wrong politicians? Should we have politicians that have integrity and intelligence, listen to people? And I think that is not the case. Maybe we need them, but I think the system is at fault here. So it's important not to blame politicians. Of course, they do wrong things, but it's better to blame the game instead of the players. It's better for your heart too. I stopped doing it. And when I now look at the news, and I used to get angry with what the politicians said and their policies, then I start laughing now. So that's quite an improvement. And let's get back to my presentation. So what is fundamentally wrong with democracy? Democracy is a collectivist system. It's and don't take it from me. It's take it from the experts. Karl Marx once said, "Democracy is the road to socialism," and the United States Socialist Party has written on its website, "Democracy and socialism are one and indivisible." So there's clearly a strong connection. It is not a neutral system. In a democracy, the individual is subordinate to the wishes of the collective. It's the idea that we can and often must decide on virtually everything in society collectively, and that the people who are against that decision must follow it too. So and democracy leads to the same negative effects as communism and fascism, namely centralization of power, everything becoming political, corruption, bureaucracy, economic stagnation. And let's go further into the causes. So this is my second part of the talk. What are the dynamics and the principles of democracy that lead to these problems? And one of them is that inherently in the socialist or in the democratic model is short-termism. Like politicians, they know they can pursue wrong policies, they can print money, they can borrow money, and they can get away with it. They can borrow money in your name, or actually in the name of your children. And they know that their successors will have to pay the bill. And of course, their successors have the same perverse incentive to kick the can down the road. So you could see that, well, Obama has just released power to Trump, but during his presidency, he raked up more debts. He added 8 trillion, as far as I remember, to the public debt, and that is more than any of his successors. So another problem is that we generally view democracy as a system in which the people are, control the government, but actually it's different. Everybody tries to live at the expense of others, and they generally succeed in that. So democracy is a giant redistribution scheme, and not necessarily from the rich to the poor, as we could have seen with the bailout of the banks, for instance, or General Motors, or Tesla. It is always from the productive to the unproductive, from the hardworking to the lazy, from the responsible to the irresponsible. And democracy legalizes immorality. It makes legal what is normally considered illegal and what would get you in prison. You're not allowed to rob someone in the streets, and most people agree with that, even socialists. But if you do it through the democratic model, people think it's social justice. Another problem with democracy is that it's not a very good way to control, contain, or direct the rulers. They can print money till there are no trees left standing. They can break election promises. They can start foreign wars like Tony Blair did under false pretenses. And they don't even get a slap on the wrist. They don't end up in jail. They don't have to pay a fine. They say this is the result of the democratic elections, and you have to accept it. So another thing is that democracy is often equated with liberty, and the opposite is true. You're not free when the majority or the state tells you what to do. You're free when you can decide over your own money, the fruits of your labor, and your own body. Democracy didn't bring us freedom, as was indicated also by the enormous regulatory growth, but also we don't have the right to use drugs. There are, in the United States, the so-called land of the free, there are 2.7 million people in jail, with about 50% for drug-related offenses. We don't have freedom of contract, we don't have freedom of profession. In the United States, 40% of all professions are licensed. We don't have freedom of education. We don't have freedom of healthcare. We don't have freedom of, rental freedom, for instance, or freedom to adjust your house. All is guided by what the state tells us. And the government takes 50% of our money, so that doesn't seem like freedom either. Another thing is that democracy is often equated with prosperity, and I think the opposite is true. Because, like I said, democracy is a giant redistribution scheme, and it disincentivizes production. And take India, for instance, the biggest democracy in the world. It has a lot of corruption, bureaucracy, poverty, whereas countries that are non-democracies or have hardly any real democracy, like Singapore and Hong Kong, they have a high standard of living, they have high growth. So there's no correlation there. And I compare democracy with going out for dinner with 100 people and deciding in advance that you will split the bill evenly. And of course, everyone has a strong incentive to order that dessert of £10 because you're only going to pay 10 cents. And so you would almost be foolish not to order it. But the problem is everyone has the same perverse incentive. And therefore, the eventual, the final tab will be enormous, but hardly anyone can do anything about it. And this is what economists call the tragedy of the commons. And democracy is not the wisdom of the crowds, as his own thought. So, taking all these problems and causes, would a constitution help? And often that is regarded as a solution. But I don't think that is, because in the United States you have a very strict constitution, but it didn't prevent the government from reinterpreting it, amending it, or bluntly ignoring it. So I don't think so. So what then? We are told that there's no reasonable alternative. The only alternative is a dictatorship. But that is, of course, nonsense, because if you say, well, I don't like to democratically decide what car I'm going to buy, someone else wouldn't say, oh, so you're in favor of a dictator telling you what kind of car you need to buy. No, I'm quite in favor of deciding it myself. And the alternative to majority rule is self-rule. And the alternative to voting with your pencil is to vote with your feet, what we do in the market. And I'll explain that later. So why should we decide on our pensions and our education and healthcare democratically? We don't do that in a market when we buy a mobile phone or an insurance. We don't use democracy in business. We don't use it in science. And we don't use it when we do our groceries. If we would, we don't use it in the family too, because otherwise we would have something like this, if you would have 2 or 3 children. So there are many sectors in society that we don't use democracy at all, and that go very well. We don't use it. Suppose we would use democracy when breaking our bread. There were There's a government tells us what kind of bread should be baked. And of course, our opponents, the people who had different tastes than we would have, they would be our enemies, whereas normally they don't. So we would see a lot of petitions and demonstrations and anger, because if you're not part of the majority, you lose. And so democracy leads to social conflicts because it's a one-size-fits-all system, winner takes all, whereas the market is a peaceful coexistence system. There are various improvements over our democratic system. I'm not in favor of democracy, although I don't begrudge anyone of democracy. People should be free to live in a system they prefer. But one country that has done better than other countries is in the heart of Europe. And it's almost like no one talks about this, especially not the mainstream media, not politicians. They go to Sweden for inspiration, but never to Switzerland. And this is unfortunate. And of course, it is a very democratic country, but I don't think the success of Switzerland lies in its democratic model of direct democracy with people's initiatives. Because it has about 8 million inhabitants and 26 cantons, which are like provinces, and they, on average, have about 250,000 inhabitants. But they compete. There's a competition between those cantons in taxes. Some cantons even have regressive taxes, so the more you earn, the lower percentage you pay. But you also, in healthcare and education, there's competition. So the Swiss can vote with their feet, and their governance is more submitted, therefore, to the discipline of the market. Although it's not a real market, but the entities, the governmental entities are much smaller, and I think that is good. Because also for governance, competition is good, I think. And with the European Union, this competition is being eroded. So I think there's a very exclusive club in this world, and it has only 200 members. And we call these members countries. And they do not like to allow in new members. They have the right to print money, to boss around their people, to levy taxes, and some of these members even kill their population, their citizens. And this is kind of a cartel. There are 7 billion people in this world, but only 200 countries. But there's enough space for new countries. We have 150 million square kilometers in this world, and 3% is urbanized. So there's enough space. So I think it would be great to have new countries being founded. And a map of Europe could look like this, or maybe the countries are even too big still. But this would create the competition we so desperately need, I think. We don't need more political parties, I think, although they're welcome with new ideas, no problem. But democracy is a one-size-fits-all game, and the market isn't. If I disagree with the majority, if 99.9% of all people choose Apple, then I'm still quite free to use Windows or Nokia or whatever, or Android. It's also that people say, well, we should be part of the EU because we need to form a front against the United States or China. And I think that is incorrect. If you look at the 20 most prosperous countries in the world, most of them are very small countries, like micronations. Liechtenstein, Monaco are very prosperous. Luxembourg, which is, by the way, part of the EU, though. But you don't have to be big to be successful. Small is beautiful. So we need new experiments on the governmental level, I think. And one of them is, one good example is the special economic zones in China. China was a total hellhole in 1976 when Mao Zedong died. 40 million Chinese died of poverty and oppression. And in 1978, his successor, Deng Xiaoping, visited Singapore for some much needed inspiration. And after that trip, they started 4 special economic zones in China. One of them is Shenzhen, just north of Hong Kong. And it was a small fisher village. And in those zones, the government didn't decide on what needed to be produced. There was foreign investment possible, there was private property possible, and this was such a huge success after 4 years that they founded 14 new special economic zones in China. And in 1990, they formed 20 new ones. So China wasn't liberalized in an economic and political way, an individual way. Centrally, it was done city by city. And now Shenzhen has about 7 million inhabitants. So we could have these economic zones too, or political experiments. Just take another example is Dubai, which grew enormously. It was just, it doesn't have much oil, but it has hardly any taxes and very little regulation. And many people, also Brits, but also the Dutch, where I come from, they like to live there. They don't have a vote, but they're not being robbed of their money either. And it doesn't matter what system, for me, I don't care what system a country has. What is the real test is, do people want to live there? And clearly, people like to live in Dubai. Has anyone of you been in Dubai? Were you impressed?
Yes, very much.
Well, I was too. I thought it was a very safe place too, despite being an Islamic country or something. Countries which are not known for its safety, or maybe known for oppressive police. But I hardly saw any police there. And, so it felt very Western for Arabic standards. Oops. I'm currently, another thing is to privatize governance, and I think this is the future. And I'm currently involved with a company, Free Private Cities Ltd, which aims to provide governmental services like security and justice and infrastructure on a commercial for-profit basis. And you wouldn't have to pay taxes, you would have to pay a yearly fee, and you would have to sign a contract which stipulates what rights you have, what you will have to pay, and what you will get in return. So it's, you will move from being a citizen with a little say to a customer with the contract, and it provides legal certainty. So what we aim for is to find a new territory, which is a virgin territory in a host country, and there's enough space around the globe. And this probably is going to be a country with, that has run out of ideas and run out of money, and that would allow new ideas to be tried, just like the special economic zones in China. And currently there are initiatives being going on in Honduras, but also in other countries. And no one of you, and neither me, does have a contract with your government stipulating what your rights are. They can change the law any day, and they do. So you have a lot of legal uncertainty, not with the contract. So these new territories, these new cities, they have to provide a clear-cut contract. They would have to provide you with a lot of liberty also, whereas otherwise they would not attract new customers. They can have a profit motive, but also therefore a cost-cutting incentive. Oh, let's go. So this would mark a shift. This commercial model. Why don't I get? Should I turn this around? Did I push on a button? That's very unfortunate. Can somebody help me? Someone? Maybe I. Oops. That's better. Which slides did you miss? Did you miss this one? Did you miss this one? No. Okay, this is the one. Well, please visit the website freeprivatecities.com for more thorough explanation of the whole concept. I think this is really a remarkable idea, and I think this is the future. But so this commercial model of governance would mark a shift from political caretakers, the politicians, to owners, and from short-term thinking to long-term thinking, from hindering citizens and companies to enabling them. I think 95% of all regulation can be thrown out of the window. They would have a very strong incentive not to overspend, but for budget discipline, like most companies do. And they would pass on those savings to their customers, to those residents. And it would mark a shift from elections to contracts, providing much more legal certainty. So in summary, democracy fails because it is a collectivist system. In a democracy, the individual is subordinate to the wishes of the collective. Democracy is power not to the people, but to the state, as we could have seen in the past century. And I would like to have been told this when I was a teenager and already politically interested, because it would have saved me a lot of time and effort, and above all, frustration. And would I vote for a Libertarian Party? I think that is a good thing to do. It's unlikely that they will ever come to the majority of votes, but it is a great platform to spread your ideas on. So the alternative is to decentralize power, to have seasteading, to have special economic zones, to have free private cities, etc. And in the 19th century, the 19th century marked the century of authoritarianism, of monarchy. And in the 20th century, we could have seen the rise of the democratic state. But in my expectation, the 21st century will mark the century of liberty, in which the governmental services are provided by the market, and we can vote with our feet instead of our pencil. And I think that is a great improvement. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.